Good morning, everyone. As we file in, I'm just going to share my screen for the housekeeping. I'm sure you're very familiar with this now, but any new people who are joining for this session, going to go through this. So we've made it to the final day of the Evidence for Action Symposium. So thank you for joining us. If you're returning, welcome back. If this is your first session, then welcome. We've got a great first session organised today. We're looking at climate and SDGs, the views from two governments. Before we get started, I'm just going to go through some of the house rules for the session today. So you can rename yourself in Zoom. So if you could use your full name and affiliation in the identification line, please put any questions you have in the chat box and we will be getting to them. And the chair for the session will be going through the format of responding to those. Any technical questions you have, also put in the chat, and where possible, we will respond to those. Please remain muted throughout the session, and a reminder that the session is being recorded. So a reminder of this is the session that we're in today. And it's my pleasure to hand over to the chair of this session, Professor Joseph Alcamo, who is the director of SSRP. Over to you, Joe.
Thanks very much, Fiona, and welcome from Symposium Central here on the south coast of England. And good morning to you, afternoon or evening, whatever pertains. Up to now, we've had dozens of folks from all around the world that have participated in different sessions. I'm guessing it's about 2/3 from outside of England, maybe 1/3 within England. My name is Joseph Alcamo, and I have the pleasure of chairing this particular session. This is the first plenary session of the 22nd July of the Evidence for Action Symposium. And I have to say, the discussions of the first couple of days have been very lively. We've had 12 parallel sessions already, and several plenaries, heard from literally dozens of speakers and keynote speakers. And they have reported on work. I've been taking notes of the different countries of the work that's been reported on, from Indonesia, Bangladesh, South Africa, Mexico, and many other parts of the world. And they've been talking about climate adaptation, about different aspects of environmental and climate justice, as well as the green recovery and the role of the climate and SDG agendas in the green recovery. And in all of this, since a lot of the speakers have been social scientists, there's been a lot of talk about actors. I used to think actors were people like Jimmy Stewart when I was young, but now I've come to learn that actors are the essential elements of any kind of local to worldwide process that we talk about, whether it has to do with local politics or global politics, whether it has to do with energy politics or sustainability. It's all about actors. And when we discuss the Sustainable Development Goals and climate protection, there are, of course, lots of actors. And wedged there between the big international organizations like the UN, like the World Bank, like the multinationals that we like to talk about, that are moving things around in a top-down way in the world, between them and the communities which are supposed to benefit from this climate protection and the Sustainable Development Goals, lies the national governments. And officially, when it has to do with the SDG, it has to do with the 2030 agenda, as well as the Paris Agreement and other regimes around climate protection, it's the national governments that have the responsibility for implementing these big agreements and having an influence, a worldwide influence, and in their countries. And today we're fortunate to have two very distinguished guests from national governments, and they'll be giving us their perspectives on the climate, on aligning the climate and SDG agendas. And I'm very happy to introduce our first speaker, who's the Honorable Henry Kwabena Kokofu. Mr. Kokofu served in the Ghana Parliament up to 2017. And since 2020, he has been the Executive Director of the Ghana Environmental Protection Agency. Welcome, Mr. Kokofu.
Thank you very much, sir. Good morning to you, everybody. Greetings from Ghana, the people and the President, Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, His Excellency. Professor Chair, Professor Joseph Alcamo, chairing the program. My colleague panelist, Right Honorable Lord McConnell, Madam Fiona Head, the moderator, and other participants. I'm to give an overview of Ghana to start with. And Ghana is a West African country. Please, are you showing the slides? Hello?
Yes, the slides are very visible. You can't see it from your side though, is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, that's too bad. So we're showing the introductory slide right now with the time.
Yes, okay. The overview of Ghana, okay.
Yeah.
The next slide.
Right, now it's the overview slide.
Yeah.
With the map on it.
Yeah, the overview, yes.
Can you go back, Fiona? That's it.
Yeah, this is that. You all know that Ghana is a West African nation, and we have a very vibrant democracy in place as a system of government or governance. Our economy is basically on natural resource exploitation. And natural resource, we do have the renewables and the non-renewables. So you can see that most of our dominant export commodities come from cocoa, oil palm, cashew, and timber, which are all renewables. And then the extractives, the gold, other minerals, precious minerals, oil and gas, and what have you. The cost of environmental degradation is estimated at 10% of our GDP. Please go to the next slide. And we have a rising human population. The last time we did a population census, Ghana, we were about 30 million people, and we're growing at 2.7% alongside urbanization. I must then say that we, in the process of doing another population census, very soon we'll get the actual results, how many people Ghana do we have. But I can assure you and say softly that we have a relatively younger population. The youth are many. There's also a rising public debt on the side of the economy. Debt to GDP ratio has hit almost 70%. And the COVID impact on economics, the economy, the small businesses, job losses, incomes, productivity, public health costs, and all others have resulted into a slower GDP growth. And the need has arisen that the government has to rely on public spending, which has culminated into debt accumulation. However, we anticipate a smart down recovery, post-COVID recovery of the economy. We are also vulnerable to climate variations, just as in many other countries in the world, particularly the developing countries. On the other, the good side of it, Ghana is vigorously and ambitiously undergoing industrialization agenda. Currently, we have an integrated aluminium industry that seeks to add value to bauxite deposits that we do have. And on the same vein, integrated iron and steel development is also going on vigorously, with the hope that Ghana will be producing its own steel and iron for infrastructure development. Automobile industry is also up and doing. On the major side of it, being an agro economy based, agri businesses and rural development is also very much of course. The next slide. Main challenges here. We have infrastructure deficits, example, affordable housing, road construction, and other things. Climate change impact is a result of a multiplier of development and public health challenges as well. Inefficient transport system, brings in its wake vehicular traffic congestion, etc. Inefficient waste management, open burning, inadequate recycling, and all that. Deforestation and land degradation is also a challenge that we are confronting. The energy mix, we rely mainly on the hydro and thermal, and there's programs and projects to change that dynamism. Rising household air pollution, that's HAP, and ambient air pollution, resulting in a mortality rate that you see over there, which is quite alarming. 16,000 people dying prematurely because of poor air quality. So the economic cost of air pollution is estimated at $2.5 billion. That's equivalent to almost 4.2% of the GDP as far back as 2017. Yes, next slide. Now, using nationally determined contribution and the SDG to address climate development public health conundrum. So all that background I've enumerated, Ghana as a country has embarked on using these tools, global determined tools to address the problem. The Paris Agreement provides the global policy framework for countries to collectively combat climate change and meet SDGs. And Ghana is very much up to it, having signed on to the agreement. Countries do so through the implementation of nationally determined contributions. And here, Ghana has a robust NDCs that we are determined to do. And we have flagship climate action for 10 years, and it seeks to address the following issues. Lowering deforestation. The RED Plus and other initiatives that are being undertaken, tree planting, conscious commercial plantation development, yes, and afforestation in general, using the youth to engage on, seek to lower deforestation. Building resilience on vulnerable landscape. We're trying to look at mountainous areas, valleys, lands to avoid landslides and all manner of things that feeds into environmental degradation. Promote also renewable energy, that we want to change the energy mix where we are very much reliant on thermal and the hydro. So solar, wind power generation and all that. Then alternative waste management systems. That goes with recycling and using waste as material, raw materials for reproduction of goods and services. Sustainable industry production I've touched on. And then urban mass transportation. Ghana is looking at the prospects of having light rail systems in our urban setups, particularly the capital, Accra, and the second largest city, Kumasi, and others that you can think of. The next slide. Integrating climate, public health, SDG into national development. Ghana's fundamental strategy to tackling climate change, public health, and SDGs is not to isolate, and it's not to isolate them and treat them silos, but integrate at all levels. Yeah, climate action and SDGs are mainstreamed into key national development documents, i.e., Ghana Beyond 8 Charter Strategy document, Ghana at 100 frameworks and accompanying National Infrastructure Plan, Coordinated Program of Economic and Social Development Policy, 2021 to 2024 Medium-Term Development Plan, COVID-19 alleviation and revitalization of enterprises support. These and many others are aimed at tackling climate change, public health in tandem with SDGs. Mainstreaming is the surest way to mobilize public finance and align ministries, local government and departments to take up their mandate and to ensure that we deliver on their goods. The next slide. I would like to touch on some of achievements on SDG and climate actions that we have chalked so far. One, beyond mainstreaming, government is working with private sector to mobilize finance for SDG and action plans. And in this regard, I must say that the private sector have been quite responsive, and they are very much in tune with government agencies and machinery to ensure that we get sustainable funding sources. Two, to establish SDG delivery and green funds in 2019 with a target to raise $100 million US dollars, and then 200 million, all led by the private sector. So this fits into the first point. Two, the Environmental Protection Agency, National Council for Curriculum and Assessment, and Ghana Education Service has incorporated climate change issues into school curricula. Here we want to ensure that the school-going children are very much in tune with all that we're talking about climate change issues and the SDGs. So the school systems have in their curricula these programs running. We prepare SDG compliant budget and publishes SDG budget tracking. The Ministry of Finance and Economic Planning in preparation of the national budget has incorporated the SDG compliant system and mechanisms in there. And there are programs to track these SDG budgets. Mobilizing carbon finance through Article 6 pilots to support climate actions, promote clean cooking, and reduce indoor air pollution. And here I must say that Ghana entered into an unprecedented agreement just recently. The president of Ghana gave the go-ahead. So the Minister for Environment, together with his counterpart from Switzerland, have signed an agreement on carbon market. And this is a very good and positive outlook for Ghana. Then establish green credit line with local banks to support green businesses. This also has been a policy statement from the Ministry of Finance directing banks to do that. Some relevant policy reforms. The next slide. We cannot achieve what we intend doing if we do not vary, if we do not review some of our policies. So one, we've adopted vehicular emission standards. So EPA and the driver licensing authority, DVLA, have come together and we've adopted the vehicular emission standards where we're going to ensure that vehicles meet the necessary standard before they get onto the road. Then we've introduced diesel fuel quality standard. Here, sulfur content reduction from diesel fuel, we used to be around 500 parts per million. Now we've reduced to about 50 parts per million, and it's quite good. We've commenced the environmental fiscal reforms policy to establish green funds. We've introduced tax exemption for solar panels and wind generation systems. When you get to the petroleum upstream, we have Petroleum Exploration and Development Act 2016, Act 919, the law, the mother law that governs that sector. And here, gas flaring in petroleum exploration and development has been key in environmental issues, air pollution and other things. So we have a plan, we have put measures in place at EPA to ensure that we restrict gas flaring from the operators. We've also adopted, since 2018, building codes that ensures energy efficiency and green buildings. And here we're talking about solar energy panels, energy efficiency appliances, water efficiency appliances, and then ventilation, allowing natural air and natural sunlight into building spaces. Next slide. Yeah, here we want to share with you some few lessons that we've learned along the pathway. And one, we've been able to enhance stakeholder engagement. That's the entire government machinery approach is in line with this. And we also have raised awareness. That's hands-on approach. People practicing what they are being told and learning along the line, and then learning what we do practice. We've been able to mobilize private sector and brought them onto the mainstream to also collaborate and complement government efforts. There have been consistent high-level support for a National Development Planning Commission that represent the government efforts, and it's quite commendable. We've also been able to facilitate and negotiate to achieve NDCs and SDGs targets with people who really are at the local levels where the real activities take place. Then MESTI, that's the Ministry of Environment, Science, Technology, has played pivotal role through sector agencies, particularly the Environmental Protection Agency, in getting to where we are now. Mobilizing technical and financial support for local participation through the ministries, departments, metropolitan and district assemblies, that's the local government levels. Lastly, but not exhausted, is the multi-sectoral collaboration. And here we're looking at institutions of higher learning. They've been quite up and doing. And then research facilities, institutions, producing the necessary research and the results to work with. And then the legislature, the arm of governance that deals with laws, that's Parliament, has also been very active in here. And then the law enforcement, we're talking about the security agencies, we're talking about the judiciary. So, so far, this is where we are, and the road is quite promising that we will get there. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kokofu, for that great overview of the many things going on in Ghana with regards to climate protection and partly with the SDGs. A lot of concrete measures you've noted, and I have to say it's nice to introduce such specific information into an academic conference like this, because sometimes the academics tend to focus on just one aspect of SDG implementation or climate policy, rather than try and get an overview of the particular situations of particular countries. So it's good to have that infusion of hearing what exactly countries are trying to do with regards to climate protection and the SDGs. I'd like to ask participants if they could hold their questions until after the next speaker. And then I also invite you to put your questions into the chat box, and then we'll get to them in just a few minutes. But first, I'm very happy to welcome Lord Jack McConnell, who between 2001 and 2007 was the first Minister of Scotland, and since 2020 has been a Labour peer, and is currently the co-chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Sustainable Development. A warm welcome to you, Lord McConnell.
Thank you very much, Professor Alcamo, and in particular, thank you very much to Henry Kokofu. That was an outstanding introduction. I'm a huge admirer of the way in which government, the public sector and the private sector in Ghana have worked together to try and, I think, use everything that's good about the global climate targets and the Sustainable Development Goals to make fundamental change happen across all sectors. And I think, you know, showing real leadership globally in great national leadership, where that integrated approach, but with real specific changes happening, I think should inspire others to be much more ambitious in what they plan to do. So it's an absolute delight to follow you, Henry, this morning, and to be here again with SSRP. And our party parliamentary group on the global goals has partnered with SSRP before, and I'm sure we will continue to do so. I first came into contact with the University of Sussex 40 years ago in 1981, when student leadership in Stirling and Sussex and a few of the other newer universities were campaigning together against the then Philistines in government, who were trying to attack the new universities because they were not yet achieving the same level of research funding as the older universities. There may be different reasons for the devastating decisions of government today, but I think the mindset is not far away from where it was back then, unfortunately. And we need to defend quality research, long-term research, evidence-based work and policy, measurement and reporting of what is good and what's bad in what we do. And you know, I think Sussex, like everybody else, is having a tough time just now because of the decisions of the government to cut back in budgets. And I just want to say, you know, strong solidarity with you. I'm sure we'll come through this, and the value of what you do, the value of what many people who are joining us today do in researching and analysing what's happening in the world cannot be measured in simple monetary terms, and we need to defend that, promote it, and build on it in the years to come. I know that most of the people who are attending today will be well versed in the Sustainable Development Goals, but I do think sometimes it's good to take a step back and just remember where the goals came from, because I think that strengthens the case today for what we need to do following the pandemic. The Millennium Development Goals were better than no goals, and they were perhaps a creature of their time, and they did make a difference in many parts of the world. But they never pretended to, and they didn't attack the root causes of underdevelopment and the longer term potential for sustainable development that was essential. And alongside the lack of long-term sustainable development that I think was in place in the period of the Millennium Development Goals, we saw the global community continuing to fail on global climate action. Plenty of summits, all the best known ones in Rio and Joburg, and of course in Copenhagen, but a real lack of international commitment and action following those summits that was going to reverse extreme climate change. And the approach that was taken to the Sustainable Development Goals was very different from the approach that had been taken before, and absolutely rightly so, in my opinion. The integration of the consultation and then the UN summit in September 2015 that agreed the Sustainable Development Goals with the Addis summit 3 months before on financing development, that recognised really for the first time the absolutely vital role of the private sector and finance in global sustainable development, not just relying on donor relationships anymore, but looking at finance and finance as a whole. That those two summits together were a combination that produced a new direction for global development that at the time I found particularly exciting. And of course, they were followed by the Paris Summit and the agreement of new climate goals that were felt to be ambitious, but maybe not ambitious enough at the time, but have proven, like the SDGs, to be difficult to implement in practice. And at the heart of the Sustainable Development Goals were some fundamental principles. Goals should be universal. They should apply in the Global North as much as they do in the Global South. The strategies to implement the goals should be comprehensive. They should have resilience, very appropriate in these past 18 months. They should have resilience at their core, but also equity as a clear ambition, particularly in relation to gender. And they recognise the vital impact of conflict and violence, stressing through Goal 16 the critical importance of peace and good governance, strong institutions that people could trust for long-term sustainable development. And then, of course, they had that ultimate objective of leaving no one behind. And I want to come back to that in relation to where we are today after 18 months of a pandemic. And I was really excited about this because it wasn't just a comprehensive platform that we could use, a framework that could really deliver sustainable development. It wasn't just integrated with the financial summit before and the climate summit afterwards. It was embedded in national action plans, as Henry said, in relation to the nationally determined contributions for climate. These national action plans were going to be at the centre of delivery. It wasn't going to rely on donors, wasn't going to rely on somebody else. Each individual country was going to take ownership of their delivery of the Sustainable Development Goals and be held accountable at home in their own country, not by somebody sitting in New York. And that seemed to me to be a change of mindset that was going to be difficult and challenging, but did give us hope. And I think the delivery has been mixed, and this is really where I come up to where we are today with this pandemic. We saw in the aftermath of 2015, countries like the UK, for example, go lukewarm on the Sustainable Development Goals, having been a leader in the debate in the lead up to September and the autumn of 2015. We saw the United States go worse than lukewarm on climate and reverse their decision in relation to the Paris Agreement. But we did see elsewhere, not just countries like Ghana, but a whole number of countries, large and small, developed and developing around the world, embrace these goals in their different forms and try to deliver sustainable change at a national level. I would argue that we saw the private sector ahead of the public sector, ahead of government in many parts of the world. The best global multinationals have done more to embrace the Sustainable Development Goals and more recently net zero commitments than most governments, although obviously there are many, many companies and multinationals in particular that are still far behind. So in individual countries and in individual companies, there was the start of a change that I think was building momentum. And obviously all of that has been challenged now by 18 months of the horrific impact of this pandemic throughout the world. And we now find ourselves today in a situation where extreme poverty is going to rise, perhaps dramatically, for the first time in at least a generation, maybe 2 generations. We see displacement, which was already at record levels, displacement of people rising to even more horrific record levels, and conflicts, internal conflict rising as a result of the economic and social pressures, the governance challenges of the pandemic and the global lockdowns. We see trust and confidence in institutions damaged again because of issues in relation to vaccinations or lockdowns, or the economic and educational impact of those lockdowns, the delivery of health services to try and help those who are affected by COVID, again in both developed and developing countries. We're going to see a massive long-term impact on health systems. We have, in my view, a global education crisis. Millions and millions, hundreds of millions of children have missed out on large parts of the school, and that's not just affecting their learning, it's affecting their psychology, their mental health, their sociability, and the life skills that are so vital for them too. And as Henry mentioned, we see economies, not just struggling individual businesses, but national debt rising, and that could be catastrophic in many parts of the world who can't cope with that level of debt over the short to medium term. And then, of course, alongside that, we have seen, and alongside the slow action to implement the Paris Agreement, we see these extreme weather events, devastating whole communities, sometimes in the most surprising places. Villages and towns in Central Europe experiencing what particularly coastal villages and towns have experienced for far too long in many other parts of the world, bringing home the impact of extreme climate change and the need to deal with the climate emergency. And all of these issues, of course, affecting women and youth in particular, and creating long-term difficulties for them. So these are, I think, dark, and they are very difficult times for all of us. But they're also a wake-up call. 6 years on from agreeing these agreements at these summits in 2015, they are a wake-up call for the importance of the discussions and the agreements that we made then. And I want to say three things briefly about that this morning. The first is that I absolutely reject the idea that we need to focus on one set of targets ahead of any others. I think the strategy in 2015 to link the Sustainable Development Goals with the climate goals and with a change to international finance as our objective, I think that strategy was absolutely right. I think it was absolutely right to embed it in national ownership. And I don't think we should retreat from that, because it is more difficult today than it was in 2015 as a result of the pandemic. I think we should reinforce that commitment, reinforce that strategy. And I think there are opportunities this autumn around the COP26 summit in Glasgow to reinforce that whole approach and to ensure that through the nationally determined contributions that we see a link between climate action and the Sustainable Development Goals that delivers real change, nation by nation, around the world, democratically accountable for that change at a local level, but at the same time showing leadership that looks far beyond the immediate crisis of 2021 and delivers towards 2030. Secondly, I think we will see a period in this autumn. We've seen in the first 6 months of this year, we've seen some of the richest countries in the world address the issue of their climate targets and what they will seek to achieve through Glasgow and beyond. We wait to see if they will deliver on that, but at least those countries, the most powerful economies in the world, are trying to address that issue and force others to keep up with them who are at that level of economic development. And we have seen big commitments across the private sector from companies that haven't been committed to net zero before, make promises. Many of them don't know yet how to implement those promises, but the commitments are being made. But I think the focus now between the summer and the summit in Glasgow in November has to be on just transitions. And again, the SDGs have a role to play here. If we are going to move not just towards these targets, but to carbon-free economies around the world and longer-term sustainable development, then we need to be aware of the impact of those decisions on those who have the least, on those who have been left behind and will be left further behind if we make the wrong decisions. So we need to have, alongside a firm commitment to tackle the climate emergency, a very strong commitment to ensure that the level of development takes place in education, in economies, in health, in infrastructure, and transitions in energy in particular, renewable energy in particular, that will allow and empower those who could be left behind by these transitions to have a just and fair outcome. And in doing that, we come back to the principles of the SDGs and leave no one behind. Don't just talk about build back better. Let's leave no one behind. That has to be the universal principle. So my message this morning, I look forward to the discussion, and I wish you well in all of your conference discussions. I know that these events organised by SSRP have brought together people from all over the world and for years now, and it is vital that we have these dialogues in these troubled and and difficult times. That as we look towards the autumn, yes, there is a climate emergency, but it's not just about climate. We need to work for sustainable development as a whole if we're really going to tackle the climate crisis, but ensure that there is equity and opportunity for all in the aftermath. That secondly, we should not give in. I know that it's dark and it's difficult at the moment, but there has been hope in recent years. There is a sea change happening in private finance around the world. There is a sea change starting to happen in the supply chains of multinationals. That I believe there's a sea change amongst women and young people around the world who are not going to accept going back to the old ways. And they're going to demand a level of empowerment and opportunity in years to come that should give us hope as we move towards 2030. So in all these difficult and miserable times, and I have been at low points over these recent months because of everything from UK government decisions on aid to the impact of education lockdowns around the world on young people. I think there is hope if we make the right decisions in the months to come and we decide that Build Back Better really means transformation and not just a slogan.
Thank you very much, Mr. McConnell. And I think your optimistic view is also consistent with your actions over the past several years, and that you have stuck with it despite quite a lot of obvious setbacks on both the national and international level. And it's a good lesson that we are making progress, slow progress, but we have to stick with it. Thank you very much. Before I start taking questions from the audience, I'm going to take the liberty of posing the first question, which reflects upon the discussions of the past couple of days. Now, you may know already that I'm a systems scientist, not a social scientist, but my political scientist colleagues, not only here in South England, but actually in this symposium from all around the world, have consistently conveyed the message that it's all about power relations. If we want to realize the climate goals, if we want to realize the various goals for sustainable development, it all has to do with also the capacity, the political capacity of different kinds of people around the world. So in lines with that also, and very consistent with that, there's been a lot of discussion at this symposium already over the past couple of days about locally led climate adaptation and locally led implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. So now that is very consistent with the idea of equity and justice. But the question is it consistent with the way power relations are set up now? But more specifically, what's the role of national government in these locally led initiatives or locally led programs? Should the national government be a way, should simply deliver the funding to the local level in some kind of equal way? What about the issue which colleagues have brought up over the past 2 days? What about capacity locally of communities to absorb climate adaptation funds and to lead these kinds of programs on a local level? So now there are some case studies of locally led initiatives, but can we scale this up around the world? Is this going to be a model by which we can finally implement climate adaptation across the world, that we can finally carry out the aims of the Sustainable Development Goals? I'll just invite either of you to chime in.
I'm happy for Henry to go first.
So, Mr. Kokofu, what do you think about that?
Yes, thank you very much, Professor Chair. I have a question here on my chat, if I can go to it. Or I have to respond.
Actually, what I'd like to ask you is, in locally led adaptation, climate adaptation, what is the role of the Ghana government in locally led adaptation? Would you be a funding source? Would you be a coordination force? Would you be a partnership locally? Would you initiate programs to train local communities on how to carry out climate adaptation? Seems like there's lots of options. So what do you think the role of the government of Ghana could be in this, this case.
Sir, you will recall that in my lessons that Ghana has learned, I talked about mobilizing technical and financial support for local participation through the ministries, the departments, district, metropolitan, and municipal assemblies. Ghana do have a robust local government structure that gets down governance to the local level at that point. So we download from the up there to the local level. And we do also have the traditional authority set up, complementing the efforts of governance at the local level. In this specific case of SDGs and NDCs, all these NDCs targets were picked up looking at the various local levels. What may be necessary for a particular region or community may not necessarily be of interest to the other. For instance, you take the northern part of Ghana, we have a long stretch of dry season where water is key. Scarcity of water is key at certain times of the year. So if you looking at irrigation dams, you're looking at providing water, sources of water for potable water and then for agriculture, then it is quite an issue there. But down south may not be necessarily the same. And likewise, we do have rainforest ecosystem down south. We're going to the western region of Ghana. We do not have the same up there. So when you are talking about cocoa timber trees or cocoa forest mosaic, and you're doing REDD+ issues or REDD+ activities there, it may not necessarily be there. So then government in its entirety have devolved the responsibility to the various levels of governance up to the local level. However, for financial constraints, most of these funding sources must come from the central bank, from the central government through the various local government ministry and its departments. So by and large, I think, and I strongly believe so, that there must be a dedicated funding source that is sustainable, that will be looked at funding these NDCs activities aside the main budget systems where already is overstretched. Central government is overstretched with funding. Right. And very importantly, development partners and other multilateral projects do come in to complement and supplement the funding of these activities down there,
Great.
Which is interesting.
Thank you very much. Mr. McConnell, what do you think about the role of the national government with regards to local leadership of climate adaptation and SDG implementation?
Well, I think there can be no doubt that for development, whether it's that's in a very developed part of the world or an underdeveloped part of the world, for development and transitions to be sustainable, to have the level of public support and engagement that helps make them sustainable, then localizing those solutions is vital. Henry Kokofu gives some very good examples from Ghana about the different conditions in different parts of the country. And that is true everywhere. So the solutions will not be the same in every community. And I believe strongly that some community ownership of those solutions and their implementation is a strength, not a weakness. However, I do think you also need to have strong national leadership that's also accountable, because this is an emergency. It does need firm action, fast action. So there needs to be a balance between the two. But the longer term objective should be to put local people in control of their lives as much as possible. I think there are, I can maybe say, I think there are maybe three critical prerequisites for this. One is accountability. And I believe very strongly that the accountability for sustainable development and for climate action, while the targets might be agreed globally, the accountability has to be national and local, because that is how to make sure that governments don't just present a pretty picture elsewhere in the world of what they are doing, but are held to account for the decisions and their implementation by those who are affected by those decisions. So national plans that are transparent and measured, and then parliamentarians and local people with strong civic society holding national governments to account for those plans, to me is the only way forward on this in this next decade that's going to actually make a real difference. Secondly, we need to recognise the importance beyond the organised formal public sector, and in particular beyond donor relationships. If we're going to see fundamental change, that means building a whole new relationship with the private sector, which is some countries are doing very well already, and some parts of the private sector are doing well. But to change the nature of investment decisions, the accountability for investment decisions, to look at the whole impact of on sustainability and moving towards net zero, and building strong public finances and systems of taxation at a local level that then provide sustainable finance for public services, rather than relying on erratic politicians in other countries and their donations. I think again is the only way to go. And then I would strongly say to countries that are spending money, as Henry says, we need dedicated streams of finance for these adaptations and transitions, to try and be more consistent with that funding than global donors have been with development funding over the past decades. The inconsistency in development funding, stopping and starting projects, cutting off projects before they finish, not analysing the impact of projects and giving them opportunities to mainstream and to hold together when they've been successful. It's shameful what has gone on over time. There are hundreds, thousands of examples all over the world of investments that have been wasted because at the end of a 3-year project time, the money's been moved to elsewhere, or projects not been finished, or it's not been mainstreamed, and therefore the longer term benefits have not been felt. And in making these climate adaptations and transitions, we need to learn some lessons from that, and national governments can do that if they handle the money better and give people more consistent, more thoughtful funding over a longer period of time to make the adaptations that are necessary. So let's not make the mistakes of the past. Let's learn from that and do it better.
Well, I think both of you have made excellent points on that, and I think it's not also the last word that we're going to hear about this on the national and international level. This tension between what are the responsibilities of the national governments versus the move to carry out things locally and have them led locally. So thank you very much for your insights on that. I want to move on to some questions that we've gotten in from the audience. The first one is directed towards you, Mr. Kokofu. It has to do, praises you for the achievements of Ghana, and asks whether, which processes with regards to the achievements you are already reaching with regards to climate protection and the SDGs, which of these processes might be transferable to other countries based on your experience?
Thank you, Chairman. I think the answer lies in all that we've been discussed right away. My colleague panelists, the Right Honourable, clearly said no one should be left behind, and indeed I should believe so. And we've also, by your own good self, talked about local participation and capacity building. So in the context of this, even though we are in a global situation, but we do have unique set of challenges that we may be looking at after seeing the generality of all that. So the general ones, yes, we're fighting poverty, we're fighting diseases, we're fighting inequalities, gender, and all that manner of things, and even justice to add on to. So joblessness, that's unemployment situations for the youth in our countries and all that. Air pollution, land, sea, water, freshwater bodies pollutions. These may be common among the rest. So the basic principle, the universal principle of not leaving anybody behind plays in here. And then also the local needs, the local participation and capacity building. Countries across the world can take up this lesson and then try to either implement or polish, or if you like, enhance on them.
Great.
For the hour. Yeah.
Thank you very much. That was a question, by the way, from Opoku Pabi. And now I have a question from Maya Bogers. And I'll direct this to Mr. McConnell, if I might. And it has to do with both of your references to the role of the private sector and private investment, which of course is in the realm of climate policy and SDG policy is a well-debated issue, isn't it? So the question has to do, so if you do engage the private sector, isn't there a risk then that company boards and executives are going to be calling the shots? And then how can you avoid the tension between this kind of locally based action and on one hand, on the other hand, with the company boards that may be less accountable to a larger population on the other hand? Mr. McConnell?
Thank you very well. Thank you for the question. Great question. I think the important, the starting point here, first of all, has to be that I don't think there's a question about whether we engage with the private sector or not. I think it's become increasingly clear over the past decade or so that changing the direction, and I don't mean just at the edges, greenwashing, actually changing the direction of global private financial investment will be the single biggest difference that we can make to sustainable development around the world. If we can ensure that funds under management, that pension funds, huge public pension funds, for example, in the strongest economies of the world, if these funds can be invested properly for sustainable development, for longer term goals, not for short term benefit, then we'll be making real transformations. And if we can ensure that companies are held accountable by shareholders and directors are held accountable in those companies for the impact of their decisions on the climate and on sustainability, and not just on the immediate profit margin for the past 6 months, then that will fundamentally change the actions of those companies in every country in which they operate. So I believe this is a really important objective. I'm excited about the direction of travel on it. That from as far as I can work out, that there have been more meetings, virtual meetings, of course, during the lockdown, but more meetings with British parliamentarians on this topic of changing finance and building sustainable financial systems than on any other topic in the last 6 months. It is the hot topic on the fringe of Parliament, and there are all sorts of people, not least Mark Carney, former Governor of the Bank of England, but leaders in global finance, Hiro Mizuno from Japan, who are leading this debate, and I think making a real difference.
Right.
But the other thing I would say is that alongside changing the way companies operate, to ally that with our sustainable development goals, not their sustainable development goals, but the global sustainable development goals and the global climate targets, I think building strong public finance systems and taxation systems in country is possibly the single most significant thing that can be done by developing governments. You know, I think changing the nature of changing the relationship between national governments and global multinationals, so they pay tax in the countries where they operate, they're held accountable for that, they work, they help finance public services and development in those countries, is a key, absolutely fundamental key to sustainable development. And so I think these are two things to do here. We need to change the way companies operate to align to longer term sustainability, but in country, build public finance systems and tax systems that help sustain good public services, good governance, and hold companies accountable for what they do locally.
Okay, so on one hand, welcoming the participation of the private sector, and on the other hand, taking various steps to ensure that they're accountable and behave in a way that's consistent with the whole ideas of the Sustainable Development Goals, right? Well, I have another question that's come in, which yes, I was going to ask you, in fact, Mr. Kokofu, what you thought about it. Plus, Mr. Samuel Howard asks, in connection with that, what your view is about the pollution of water bodies by multinational corporations in Ghana, which I guess is related to this, isn't it? It's just exactly what we're talking about. We're inviting the private sector in, but perhaps their behavior hasn't been what we have appreciated in the past. What do you think about that and his question?
Yeah, yes, it's quite interesting, that particular topic. In Ghana, we do have what we call corporate responsibility agreements incorporated in issuance of permits for multinational companies who come into work, particularly in the extractives. You're looking at our petroleum agreement, the PA. We do have this incorporated, and then the mining sector as well we do have. What goes on there is that a social contract is created between the entity and then the community, the host community where the project is supposed to be or is expected to be. So the local people through the traditional authorities as leaders opinion would then have to arrange with the company to know exactly what they want or what they need. And in most cases, we at Environmental Protection Agency and others state institutions that has to do something to do with regulations of these sectors do provide the necessary guidelines, and then we facilitate a negotiation agreement that benefits the people. It is by the people who choose those projects by themselves, and then it is the people that manages the project all by themselves. In that aspect, we've been able to lower or limit the tensions between the communities and board of directors of those companies wanting to do things all by themselves and on their own, dictating the pace. We've been able to neutralize that kind of tension so far. What it is not so much on the table is how much to be put in there. And here again, we have a calculative percentage-wise, the contract sum or the entire project sum, a portion going into the social amenity provision for the people by the company itself. And if I may go to the question itself, so a lot about government initiatives towards addressing climate change, and as may I please know how much invested in the adult education? I think that one, or
yeah,
he's
praising the Ghana government for your investment in private education, adult education rather, on climate change adaptation. But his key question was about the pollution of water bodies by the multinational corporations.
Well, here I must say at the EPA, we have little to worry about multinational companies when it comes to water treatment, wastewater treatment, and vis-a-vis pollution. we have stringent environmental guidelines in place that goes to regulate the wastewater disposal and management. What we do have on our hands that poses serious challenge has to do with the unregulated sectors of small-scale mining activities that locally we call galamsey. The irresponsible manner of mining in the water bodies have resulted in most of our water bodies being disturbed or destroyed, degraded, if you like. So multinational companies that we do have in our systems, the large-scale mining companies, and they are very much under strict regulations. And we should remind ourselves that the global environmental guidelines will even not permit them if they are found to be culpable in going against the environmental regulations. I mean, the World Bank, other funding sources and all that will not even agree to do that. Yes, we do have water bodies destroyed, polluted, but the culprits have been clearly identified, and it is about the irresponsible small-scale mining activities that we are. And the president of the land has waged war on that, and we, as the sector agencies, are supporting the Ministry of Lands and Natural Resources in this aspect. So if you can see this document here with me, the vice president of the land have asked us at EPA to come up with a program that says land and water restoration project. So very soon we're going to undertake a major activities that will seek to one, reclaim, two, rehabilitate, and restore land and water bodies that have been destroyed.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So Mr. Howard, you got a nice answer from a senior official from the Ghana government on your question there. And let me move to the next question, which is from John Thompson, which is also, like the previous questions, very important and hits issues right on the nose. Over the past 2 days, there's been a lot of discussion as part of the symposium about the crisis narratives, as they're called, the bad news that's being delivered by national governments to their citizens in attempts to warn them, to make them aware about the possible impacts of climate change, but also with regard to the Sustainable Development Goals and the extent of hunger in their countries and issues like that. So on one hand, we have the national governments delivering these crisis narratives to their citizens. On the other hand, whenever pollsters go out there and check the level of awareness to the average citizen, if there is such a thing, to about climate change, about the Sustainable Development Goals, the level of awareness is consistently very low. So what concrete steps, I'd like to pose this question to both of you, which concrete steps should government take under these circumstances in order to really get people aware and acting on both the Paris Agreement and on the 2030 development agenda? Kind of a broad question, but what are your ideas about it? Mr. McConnell?
Well, I think I have to talk about this in the context of the current situation in the UK, because I think that the decisions that we have seen over the past 12 months in the UK to very much a political decision to cut development funding from the UK to the rest of the world by 30%, savage and very speedy cuts in funding of existing projects, existing promises and agreements, I think has happened because those of us, and I take my own share of responsibility for this, although I think I've been warning about it, may even have done that at Sussex in the past, been warning about this for some time. I think those of us who care passionately about the UK's role in the world, our obligations to the rest of the world, our duties, our need for global action if we're all going to be safe and secure and prosperous and free, I think took our eye off the ball and relied on governments to do this for us rather than do it ourselves. And I think that opened an opportunity for malign forces to attack the UK's contribution to global development. And we see the outcome of that today without really them receiving a kickback in popular support or being held to account for it properly. So I think we need to take a step back and say, look, the responsibility for educating, for empowering, for inspiring citizens in their knowledge of the SDGs and the Paris Agreement and their desire to force governments to take the right actions, that lies with all of us, civic society, yes, individual politicians and public figures, different levels of government. We all need to play a part. Churches and faith organisations, we all need to play our part in ensuring that the public are knowledgeable, that they are motivated, and then that they act, because that is the way to make sure that politicians and governments do the right thing and not the wrong thing. And I think we found ourselves in a bad place in the UK in the last 12 months, but it should be a real wake-up call for all of us to turn this around over the coming years. And to me, that's true all over the world. The places that have taken the best action on the SDGs around the world are places where there is increasingly a culture of public service and local accountability. And that is true whether it's the developed world or the developing world. In different continents, the countries that give us the best examples of SDG and climate action are the places where the relationship between government and the people is a positive one, or at least more positive than it was in the past, and rather than a negative one. And the places where the action is putting us in the wrong direction are the places where politics is broken.
Thanks for your insights there, based on experience, for sure. Mr. Kokofu, you have the last word. We're just about running out of time here in this session. Oh, still on mute.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear now.
Yeah, thank you very much. What is awareness and knowledge issues? I want to fragment it and then put them in some kind of context. We're looking at the school children and the youth. How much are we putting in there to let them be aware, and then at the same time make the knowledge available to them so far as climate change and the SDGs are concerned? And that's what I earlier on said, that the EPA together with the National Curriculum Authority and the Ministry of Education have inculcated in the curricula of the various schools and all that. So we are catching them young and trying to put the idea. This time we are not only awareness, not knowledge, but combining both. On the adult side, we do have the rural setup, the rural dwellers and all that, where most of our farming communities are. And here I must be clear that the knowledge is quite in-depth there. The indigenous knowledge that farmers do have with regards to climate and weather conditions is so enormous. And it's a matter of just empowering them and then making sure that the actions are done down there. That is what is much needed. In Ghana, you go to a rural setup and they'll be able to tell you by looking into the sky and all that it's going to rain tomorrow or the other. And they know when to go prepare the field and to do the sowing. This is indigenous knowledge that have to be developed and tapped by empowerment. Then you come to the intelligentsia and the ordinary citizenship. The intelligentsia have the knowledge and they are aware, but the will to do, the commitment to undertake actions is what is missing. So government effort and institutional effort is to try to enforce regulations. Yeah, enforcement is key. Punish people for not doing what needs to be done, sanction them, and then bringing them to book is quite key and important in this direction. As we continue with radio and the media engagement to create the necessary awareness.
Very good. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Well, we've come to the end of the session, unfortunately, because I don't know about you, but I've really enjoyed it. Hearing from these two very knowledgeable people. It's going to be ongoing discussions and debates about the roles of national governments in achieving our climate goals and achieving the goals for sustainable development. Certainly, they're going to be at the center of the action, and there's going to be ongoing debates about what the role of national governments are relative to local communities, relative to the international organizations, relative to the private sector. But I think you heard many, many good ideas from our speakers today. And I want to thank heartily Honorable Henry Kokofu and the Honorable Jack McConnell for contributing to our discussions today, and also for the audience's questions. Thank you very much. I wanted to alert participants out there that this is not the end of discussions for today, but it's just kind of a great kickoff to them. And join us again at 10:30 British Standard Summertime, rather, 10:30 British Summertime, for the next set of parallel sessions, which will include from the ground up, advancing SDGs and climate adaptation at the local level. Again, there you have it. Again, you have these local initiatives in climate adaptation. Integrated approaches to converging climate and health crises, and strategies and frameworks for aligning the climate and SDG agendas. Again, echoing some of the very important issues that we discussed in this session. Hope you all stay well. Thanks again to all, and see you again soon. So long.
Thank you.